Everyone's nearly here now.
Okay, well, here we go. So that's our start cue.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Briley Habib, calling in from Istanbul. It feels a bit like the Eurovision here, ready to give my points over. And I've been teaching for a number of years now and have moved to project-based learning for about the last 6 years. I really enjoy this type of pedagogy. I think it brings in everyday geographies very well. And I was really pleased to hear that Daryl was doing it as well. So over to Daryl.
Thank you very much. So I'm Daryl Sinclair. Please bear with us. Unfortunately, we can't see you, so we don't get any feedback. So we're going to do our best to keep this as engaging as we can, but feel free to type things to us if you can. I've been teaching project-based learning for about 6 years as well. And I've found it a technique that as I've got more and more comfortable with it, I've realized how easy it is to do. And that's why we're here and we want to teach it to other teachers. And also noticing how it can be used as a technique to introduce students' everyday geographies and therefore make the classroom a much more inclusive place. So targeting many of those key important factors of a safe and inclusive classroom that we need in the modern day. So we're going to hopefully guide you through this, and like any good lesson or any good project-based learning, we're going to start off with a question. And that question for everyone to start off with is, how many voices must a scheme of work have to be considered inclusive? Now, of course, in this setting, I can't really just pick on people to answer, so I'll move forward with this, but it's more of a theoretical response here. When we're trying to be inclusive, especially in the context of project-based learning, the voice that we need to listen to is the voice of our students. So technically, I've got this fancy slide here. It's not just one voice, but all of your students should be the voices you're listening to when you want to complete a project-based learning scheme of work. And when you're trying to make your classroom as inclusive and as possible, and introduce the everyday geographies, the life experiences, and the personal knowledge of your students into the classroom. So, just to be clear, as we've got on the slide here.
Daryl, they can't see your screen.
Oh, I do apologize. Thank you. There we go. So thank you for notifying that. So when we talk about listening to your students, just to be clear, because this is often a little bit of a kickback or feedback from some teachers with regards to project-based learning. This isn't free range teaching. This isn't walking into the classroom and saying, do whatever you want. It's not that by any measure. The skill that we need to bring to project-based learning as the teachers is the scaffolding, the pieces in place which add structure to the project and give every student the chance to be successful and know what they're doing. So with that being said, we always like to start off with a finished product. You know, we always like to show you what you're going to end up with. I'm going to start off with 2 videos, very short videos, of some of the excellent work that Briley has done in some of her schools recently. And I'm going to show this to you, and then Briley's going to talk through some of the projects that she has been doing and the success that she has had. So just bear with me while I change to show these videos. Okay. I'm going to try and make this full screen. I've turned the sound on, so let me know if there's any problems with that.
Ensure Collective, from the sewing of these women to the mask on your face, from the hands of these women to the item in their store, it is Ensure Collective that expands our heart.
Ensure Collective is a beautiful platform with a beautiful message. It helps the community in more than one way. The brand's Beautifully Made to Trees is handmade, and the refugee women who are working on them are getting paid back 80% of the money. The organization focuses on helping people and saving the environment.
They are an environmentally friendly organization who care about their carbon footprint.
Okay, so that's our first video. If I just pause that quickly and I'll switch to the next one. And here we go. So if I turn it over to Briley.
Hi, everybody. So 2 videos that you've seen, and we wanted to show you that through project-based learning, you could actually have your audience within your school, or it could be outside of your school. Daryl, could you pop it back to the main slide so we can just talk through that? Perfect. So the second video that you saw was actually within school, and it was a student-led museum, and they worked with the history department as well, and they created Slavery Through the Ages, based on a book that we had read called A Mile Unbound. So they were able to create something to do with modern day slavery and show it how they wanted to. How did they think that modern day slavery was still around? The very first video that you saw was from Inshira Collective, which are a group of refugee women here in Istanbul. They had a driving question where they had to increase profitability for these refugee women, also looking at the effects of fast fashion. So they decided to come up with an advertisement that could be used on social media, on the school website, etc., to really encourage people to purchase their products. In the middle there, you can see a project on the geography of health. You can't really read it there, but it was actually a newspaper article. And this actually was a 10-week project, which was extremely long. Not all projects have to be this long. They can be from a couple of lessons right the way up to 10 weeks or longer if you choose. But this one itself, they had to organize an event for the Diabetes Association within Bermuda to raise awareness and educate the community of type 2 diabetes for World Diabetes Day. This was the winning group. They did a very simple walkathon where they walked around in the circle on the field, raising awareness, dressing all in blue and educating the community that way. They managed to raise $3,000, purchased a television for the Diabetes Association. So it was kind of, educating, but an ongoing commitment for them. And then, as you can see, hopefully on the left, we actually looked at civil rights movement and women's rights movement in particular with suffragettes. And unfortunately, in Bermuda, they didn't actually get the vote, Black women, until the 1960s. So we got them to research the very first person in their family that can vote. And there were actually still people around within Bermuda that could talk about their life experience. And you can see that the students there were tying the posters up on the school railings to represent suffragette movement. So that was really interesting. So different types of projects that you can do, whether they're small projects or big projects in your school grounds or outside of your school grounds.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. So some great examples there, and hopefully everyone can get a feel for the different scales. So we'll look at more scales that you can employ project-based learning from within your own classroom all the way to dealing on quite a large scale. And just like Briley said, projects which might take 2 weeks or projects which might take 10 weeks. So there's a lot of flexibility here that we're hoping to introduce. But as you'll hopefully have noticed through the information that's just been shared, there is a key characteristic for something to be project-based learning. And it's as simple as this. The foundation of project-based learning is about incorporating the student as a creator of knowledge, not just any creator of knowledge, but the primary creator of knowledge. Now, as we go through this presentation, a key understanding I want us all to have at the beginning is that when we're referring to the idea of understanding and knowledge, what we're actually referring to is the layer of understanding that is added on top of factual knowledge. If geography was just factual knowledge, we could teach it from a textbook. We could simply tell our students the answers, and we know that not to be the case. And we know that technique to actually be what marginalizes and excludes many people from the classroom. It doesn't allow them to incorporate their own personal narratives and see their connection to the geography. And it can sometimes, where things are misrepresented, cause them to completely disengage. So what we want to focus on here is using the student, using their own basis of knowledge and experience to incorporate that into the creation of knowledge by applying it to the research they do, the things that they learn. And this is going to be a key common thread throughout this presentation. So I do hope we focus on this very clearly. So what are we going to do today? So we're 10 minutes in and we're just getting to the learning outcomes. What we want you to do is recognize the importance of project-based learning as a technique to examine everyday geographies as something which can be used to make your classroom incredibly inclusive and deal with many of the key pedagogies that we're trying to incorporate into our classrooms to make them more inclusive spaces. And probably the reason why many of you actually came today, we want you to leave today with a collection of resources to be able to put together or action your own project-based learning scheme of work. So that's what we're going to be doing for the majority of this remaining 35 minutes. So we're going to design a plan for your own project-based learning scheme of work. So to start off, I'm going to start with a story, with a narrative. Now, this is partially based on experience, but it's fictionalized for obvious reasons. Now, my fictional character here, Jason, is perhaps a student that many of us can think of, many of us can relate to. Jason is a student that we're coming across more and more in geography academia, of the student who is becoming disengaged in their lessons. The student who, very similar to those of you who were able to listen to the story of Iram last night at the Teach Meet, speaking about the student who feels that their personal experience and their personal knowledge is not matched by what's presented to them in their lessons or perhaps in their textbooks. And this mismatch can cause a student to see less value in what they're learning and cause them to disengage and sometimes feel completely disrespected or marginalized, or just not have any intrinsic motivation or reason to want to take part. And we want to address this. But a very important thing and close to my heart is not only thinking about the student when we think about project-based learning, but to also think about the teacher. There are many teachers, many of us who are here right now, who may at times become frustrated with the geography curriculum. We may be engaging with topics or using resources where we feel like that's not quite right. That's not how I want to represent this to the students. And perhaps we have to use some of these resources. And it can cause us to spend additional time trying to make the most exciting, engaging lessons, all the bells and whistles, to make up for the fact that the actual way that we are teaching is part of what's causing the disengagement. So project-based learning should hopefully address some of these issues. But what it boils down to is that a lack of inclusion, of real experiences, a lack of connection to our everyday geographies can leave both teachers and students feeling disengaged with what they're teaching. So this is where we present you with the magic pill. This is the sales pitch. What is project-based learning and how does it resolve this? This is what we're going to do now. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. Let's get moving to the real meat of this. There's two key focuses for what will lead to project-based learning. The first one is a simple gesture. The first thing that we need to be doing with any projects that we're leading is making sure that the true leader of the project is the student. It's ensuring that their voices, their knowledge, and their experiences, and very importantly, potentially their lack of experiences, are what help to create new learning and understanding. That's what we're looking to do. This is a very constructivist approach to teaching. The second thing that we need, that you may have heard about before, is the idea of an authentic audience. Within the work that we do in project-based learning, a critical factor is an authentic audience. There needs to be someone that the student is producing this work for. It could be a classmate, it could be an examiner, it could be their teacher, it could be the head teacher, it could be the local MP. But the idea is that there is a real person which generates some ownership of the work for the students, some intrinsic motivation. I want this to be good because I know they're going to see it. Not just simply answer these questions so I can mark it. So this authentic audience is going to be a critical part to this work. Now, to bring this to life a little bit more, some of us may be thinking about how project-based learning can fit into examination. And of course, you know, the requirement for us to ensure our students can do well at IGCSE, A-level, IBDP, or whatever programs you may be teaching. So I'm going to pass over to Briley here to have a look at what she does at IGCSE with project-based learning.
Thanks, Daryl. Okay, so obviously we need to make sure that we're always hitting those syllabus requirements so that the students are able to access the grades that they are deserving of. And project-based learning can be done with GCSE. They are gaining the knowledge that they need to, but they're also having this kind of student voice and choice, which is very fundamental for project-based learning, and able to use what they want to research instead of us giving us, the case studies that we want to teach them. So I look at development in this section, and I'm choosing 3 lessons covering those particular elements of the syllabus that you can see right there. I know that the students have to have something to revise from. So Daryl, if you just press the Google Doc there at the bottom, we do make it very structured, but they do obviously have that driving question. So you can see the driving questions down there. They're looking at development, they're looking at inequalities, but they're also being asked, well, what do you think I have to do to have that authentic audience, which is the examiner in this case? What do I have to do for them? So they read back through the syllabus, they look at the terms of the syllabus and what is essential for them to know and understand. They're given some examples through experiential learning depot, and then they have to justify why that product will educate the community, but also enable them to understand the syllabus requirements. So they have, these drop-in sessions with me. They have marking rubrics that are based on the exam itself through the specification. And then this is where the voice and choice comes in. They scroll back through, down, there we go. They choose the countries that they want to investigate to hit those syllabus requirements. They get feedback from me as well at certain points, which we call milestones that Daryl and I will talk to you about later. And then each person in the group has a role to carry out, and then they have to say how that research is going to feed into their final product that they decide on. They also have to make sure that they understand all of the terms, they've referenced them, and that they will be able to put that into their final product as well. And then final reflection, what was difficult about doing it? And also they have to say why it's going to be useful for the school community when addressing those issues. And then at the bottom of that sheet, they can see that there's some exam questions. So the usefulness would be that their product will be able for them to then answer that GCSE question. Now, when we did this project at school, we had, a range of things that the students decided: PowerPoints, Kahoots, story maps, newsletters, anything that you can think of, that the students had that voice and choice in terms of country, product at the end of it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to switch back now, but hopefully through looking at all of that, you can see that with project-based learning, and we're going to be providing you, you have access to all of these documents we're showing, and we will be providing you with some of the templates that you can use in order to fill in a blank version of these documents so that you can apply it to your lessons and have some more organization and structure to what you're doing. But this is a very carefully planned out piece of work. It's not free reign. And that's an excellent example of how quickly you can set something up. And hopefully, as Briley's shown, the onus is on the students. So it's very clear, the onus is on the students to use the resources, to do their own research and come up with their own definitions. And us as teachers are guiding that process through the feedback points to ensure that they're hitting what they need to be successful. So this is my turn to jump in and share a couple of projects. So both of us at the moment, we teach the IBDP, but I want to just to say this explicitly, because I know there can sometimes be a bit of a perceived segregation between international teachers and teachers who are teaching in their home country, whatever that may be or what that may mean to them. But this is the same wherever you are. Within the schools I've been teaching in over the last 6 years, I want to give some examples of the kinds of projects and the kinds of work that we do at IB level, but also all the way through to grade 7, 8, and 9, for example. So I'll start off with the work on the right-hand side, this lovely river transect, looking at the profile of a river, typical geography, we might say. What we had here was a project that was done, I believe, with grade 10, if I remember correctly. And they had a question to look at how can we support grade 7 learning about rivers? And we did this wonderful project over a number of weeks where the students amongst themselves figured out how could they support the students, what did they want to produce, and how could they bring their learning and their experience of learning rivers to support the learning of the grade 7s. And then the second part was using that product for the grade 7s to complete their introduction to rivers scheme of work in grade 7. So we can see how everything there took place within the school. I didn't need to do anything special. I didn't need to contact anyone. And we have a wonderful project with an authentic audience where the students are in control of what's being produced with the intrinsic motivation of knowing who they're producing it for. The other ones we have on here, I've got a board display here, which was when we were doing a depth study of China. And this was actually while I was teaching in China. And part of the project was to look at how we could educate the school community, knowing that there was a parents, I can't remember what we called it. It wasn't quite a parents' evening, but a parents' visit, so that they could see and other students could learn about the local contemporary history, which led up to what we experience of day-to-day China at the school and in the local community. And then this final one at the top, this is probably the larger scale one. It was originally going to be contacting some local farmers where I am currently in Germany and finding out some of the challenges of small scale farming. But it turned out, and there's sometimes magic things which happen when you're trying to make a scheme of work or a project. Both farmers that I contacted were super keen on the students visiting the farms. And thankfully, with all the challenges of the last couple of years, we were actually able to go. They were very nearby. In one of the farms, was a 45-minute walk, but we walked there. And we got to meet and speak with these farmers with the idea that the students were going to produce an article. There's an example of one of them here, to help teach the local community about why they should use their local farms for food from a geographical perspective. So what challenges do they face, how it supports the environment to eat local, and other very important topics like this. And this in Germany, this is an examining year group. So this would be the equivalent of the GCSE year. In Germany, we call it the MSR. So just to share those with you, and now to get to the full part of it, let's start planning your project-based learning scheme. So this is where we can really get our hands dirty. The first step, how to create a project-based learning scheme. What I would like everyone to do is I would like you guys to make use of creating a driving question. Your driving question is what drives your project. It doesn't have to be perfect. And up until the point that you present it to your students, it might change shape as you think about your time scale, what you want to focus on. But we need an initial question that we are asking the students to begin the work. There's a little bit of guidance here on the right-hand side to help you with the kind of language we want to be using when we're generating a driving question. What I've also got on the chat, you can see the link to the Padlet. I've got it up here as well on the PowerPoint. And for those of you who need it, I'm going to switch quickly to a QR code, and you can scan this with your phones to have a look at the Padlet. So I'm going to change to that QR code now. And then I'll give it 30 seconds or so, and I will share the screen with the Padlet to show you how to use it. So this is the QR code that you want to use. And I'm going to quickly switch over. Thank you for posting the link again, Briley. And quickly going to switch over to actually showing you the Padlet and how it works. So please leave a message if there's any problems with that QR code. It should work perfectly, I hope. I'm going to switch the screen now, so hopefully you guys can all get access to that. But this is what you should be seeing right now. So the driving question. This is the part of the Padlet I'd like everyone to start filling in. I've put an example here of one of the questions that we have created. And it's how can we support grade 7 learning about rivers? So this is the example that we were using previously. Just to show you, and I've got two versions here. In order to write your question, please click on the plus sign here at the bottom. And when you click on that, this big screen is going to come up. And unfortunately, sod's law, it has come up in a very strange space on my screen. But if I broaden that out. And what I'd like you to do, if you're happy to be named, if you put your name as the subject, and if you're not happy to be named, just put a word that you can use for each of your inputs so that we can at least track the answers. So we can see what you put into each section in case there's any advice we can give. So if you put your name down and then write down what your question might be, how can we improve the sustainability of our school, for example. And I want to give you guys a couple of minutes to try and come up with a driving question of your own and post it into the Padlet, please. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that now. Okay, I'm very happy to see the first input there. There's always the nervousness because I can't see you guys, but thank you. Hopefully we can get a few more before we move on. Okay, excellent. So hopefully there's a few more people who are thinking of some questions that they can add on here. Just to do a quick response to some of the questions which have appeared. A really key tip, those of you who do coursework projects, you may have had this similar advice before. Generally, as you can see in the driving question generator chart, we tend to use words, command words like how, what, or model how, because these are questions which generally require some form of research or some form of investigation. Unfortunately, what we sometimes find is questions which begin with why can actually be very difficult to form a project around. When we say, why does something happen, we can approach it from a purely theoretical standpoint. And it's really important with project-based learning that we're pushing towards having tangible use of experience and tangible use of data. Whereas why can be very speculative, and sometimes a weakness of that can be that students will approach it from why, because of this, that's why, question answered. And we really want to avoid that. Whereas how demands explanation. Oh, great. I'm really liking the inclusion of the local community in some of these suggestions here. And these can be, I've used a project-based learning scheme of work in the past to create a sustainability council for a school. And that actually gave birth to something which still exists in my old school in China. So yeah, sometimes you can think really big with these projects and you might create something that you never expected and which might live beyond your classroom. And let's have a look here. So what impact could geography students have on the school community if we educated them about fast fashion? Yeah, lots of powerful questions here. And we've got to also think about sometimes the driving question can enable us as teachers to put some of our personal knowledge into the lesson and make the lesson more interesting for us. And we all know that a passionate teacher is often the best teacher you can have. So if there's no immediate questions, there's some excellent suggestions here though. I'm gonna switch back to the PowerPoint and move on to the next section. So the next thing that we need to do, I'm going to quickly switch over here. I'm going to politely ask, please don't continue with the Padlet until we move on. It just makes everything a little bit smoother. But the next thing that we need to do is to create a goal. So when planning project-based learning, you've noticed that in everything that we've talked about so far, there's been an end product. We spoke about this at the beginning. So we've got our driving question. The next thing we need to know is, where are we trying to get to? Any good project needs an outcome. Now, be aware that often when we see project-based learning, especially on Twitter, especially online, especially on video, we can often see these projects which are so grand, projects where we met our local MP and we convinced them to change this policy of our local community and rebuild. We're not expecting that, and it's not sustainable to approach project-based learning in that way. Your product can be as simple as a poster which is stuck up in the classroom or outside the school, as Briley showed us. It could be a little exhibition within the school. It could be a presentation to the senior leadership, the head teacher, the head of year, whoever it might be, that will give someone that the students are really passionate about presenting to. It can also be as large as writing for a local newspaper or talking to your local MP if you can make that happen. So think about your scale carefully. Think about what you can feasibly achieve in your classroom. Start off with things that you're comfortable with. If you're really good at doing posters, then make your first project-based learning a poster to increase awareness at your school about XYZ. But if you can, again, move over to the Padlet and try and think of what goal you could put down. So my example here was to create a resource which the grade 7s can use to help them learn about rivers. Using the same techniques that we used for the first question, the first part, please put down what your product would be for your project. If I give you a few minutes to get some ideas down for that, please. Okay, while people are thinking about their ideas, I'm just going to respond quickly to the inspiration from Briley. Thank you. This is a great example of a product which you can't always tangibly measure. When you're thinking of your product, try to think of something generally that you can physically have. Now, when I say physically, we are in the digital age, so it might be producing an app or some kind of digital presentation, but I mean the idea that it's something tangible. With reducing fast fashion consumption, sometimes we might find that that's actually a case for another project where you need to do some data collection at the beginning. How frequently do students at our school purchase from these fashion outlets? And then later on to check if your project has had any impact. So sometimes it's easier to make your life simpler as a teacher and focus on something you can control, something you can produce. So you could produce media which can advertise to students or inform students how to make wiser choices or more sustainable choices with fashion. So try and think of things which you can do which are tangible. Okay, again, I'm liking the inclusion of the school community and the use of the head teacher. I would argue that getting your head teachers or your SLT involved is a brilliant thing to do. They want to be involved generally. Little nod and a wink there. But for the students, often in most schools, that is a person who will encourage intrinsic motivation in the students. Now, I'm becoming very aware of the time, and I know I have a tendency to talk too much. So I'm going to quickly move on to the next one. But if you have ideas, please continue to put them on, because you'll be able to access this after the presentation and you might find some inspiration here, and we can still give feedback to each other. We can write comments. I'm very happy to see that people are liking some of the suggestions on there. So please keep doing that. This should be a good resource for us even afterwards. So next step, let's move on as quickly as we can before we run out of time. So the next thing that we need to do when planning a project-based learning scheme is that we need to ensure that it can be done independently by the students. So although we will be there in every lesson, and during those lessons, we'll be walking around, we'll be doing continuous formative assessment. A frequent question which comes up is, how do I assess the work if they're doing all this independently? You do it in the lessons. You walk around, you speak to them. How's your project going? What ideas did you have? Oh, that sounds good. Did you think of this? Those interactions which are so critical to engage teaching. So what we need to do to give the students the ability to get on with it independently is to make sure we have, and we might call it different things in different schools, a success criteria, marking scheme, a rubric, a checklist, whatever you may call it in your school. Now, of course, we don't have time to make a full success criteria right now, but we want you to focus on 3 key things that you would want your students to achieve. Now, when you're creating these, we want you to focus on an academic target, a target which is to do with their audience, and a target which is to do with their own personal engagement. Now, I'll show you what that means on the Padlet. So if I quickly switch over, I'm going to do it with a little bit less refinement this time. We want you to have 3 foundational requirements for student success. So the example I have for you here, if I just make this a little bit larger, is how can we support grade 7 learning about rivers? The first part that we need is that they must include clear definitions of key terms. That's critically important. That's our academic success criteria. The second one, they must include diagrams or models for the students to understand. So that's thinking about their audience. What can they do to ensure their audience can engage? And the final one here, explain why you think rivers are important or experiences you have had or would like to have for the students who may not have visited rivers, with rivers to bring the resource to life. Now, of course, I'm not expecting your inputs to be as detailed as this or as refined at this point, but if you can try and put down some ideas of what 3 goals you could give to your students: an academic goal, how to ensure that they do well for their audience, and how to ensure that they include their personal everyday geographies into the learning process. That's what we're aiming for. If we give you a couple of minutes to try and get some ideas for that, please. And thank you to those of you who have posted already. Okay, I can see a few people typing, but I'm also very aware of the time, and I do apologize for this, but we will try and power on forward. So I'm going to immediately switch to the final part for setting up your outline for your project-based learning, and that is the idea of the major milestones. Now, when we're planning, I'm just going to go straight to the Padlet for this one. If I just click resume. When we're doing these projects, a frequent concern of teachers who may be less familiar with project-based learning is the concern about how long it will take or how far they'll need to spend time on it to make it work. So it's crucial during our planning stage that we identify key milestones. So again, I'm going to recommend that you try and think of 3 milestones. We generally want the 3 milestones to include preparation, so collecting the resources they need, or perhaps planning what they're going to create, getting their team together. If we refer back to the document that Briley shared with us, we've got a point where the students have to pick their team members and what they're going to be researching. A second point is a point where you can formally give some formative assessment. So hand in their first draft, for example, of their work. It must be done by Friday, the first Friday of the project. And then the final point should be the final submission. So the final milestone can be responding to feedback and handing it in. So with the example that I've got for you here, for the rivers work, the first milestone is deciding what they will create. The second milestone is preparing all their written materials so that I can check them and give them feedback. And the final points are creating the final product and receiving their feedback and responding to the feedback. So just try and think, what would be 3 major milestones for you? Now, I've got a good question here. How do you track this response, completion, and feedback? When we talk about tracking, it may seem alien, but we are not going to be doing lots and lots of bookmarking. I mentioned earlier how project-based learning can actually reduce the workload for the teacher. And it's because much of your assessment and tracking will happen during the lesson. So it will be your role as a teacher, each lesson, to walk around and visit each group, or have a look over the shoulder of different students and have an idea of where they're getting to. Sometimes a very good technique is just at the beginning of the lesson to say, how far have people got? Who's reached this point? Or who's done this? Who can share with the class what they've thought of so far? And these small steps can really, really help with tracking the progress. And as we detailed in the milestones, there should be key planned points where you can give formal feedback to the students, where you will look at a draft and you'll give them written feedback that they can refer back to. So there will be tracking of responses, of progress, and of course, the final product will be assessed, whether that's assessing a presentation or assessing a written piece of work or a prepared piece of work or a model, whatever it may be, based on your success criteria. So let's have a look at what we've got. UK energy security. Create guidance.
I think that was from a different one that we did.
Oh, I see.
Oh.
Oh, did I leave those ones on? Never mind. They're still good for us to see. So do we have some new ones here?
I think you can't see them, but let me just double check.
So what I'm going to do here is jump straight as we enter the last few minutes, is jump straight to the end. Now, I'm not going to be blind to the engagement so far. Hopefully, even those of you who haven't been able to put something onto the Padlet have hopefully seen some of the process here. I was hoping that there was a lot more people who I'd be able to say this to, but hopefully through what you've seen so far, you can get the ideas for an outline for a project-based learning scheme of work. But ultimately, if I jump straight here, this might be what many of you can take home with you. We've got a collection of resources here, which range from the documentation, including the document that Briley shared with us, so that you can plan your own scheme of work. We've got an article on here that's on decolonized geography that I wrote, which also has planning documentation on it, which I think I can quickly show here. So it's slightly off center, but there's a project-based learning guiding template, which is available on decolonized geography. And what we want you to do is to take these with you and try and do your first project-based learning scheme of work. And if you are able to do that, whether as soon as you get back from the holidays or just in this remaining half term, please let us know. Please share it with us. we'd love to hear your stories. You can hashtag #myfirstpbl. And we'd love to give some feedback, maybe some guidance if there's things that you're not sure about. You can find us on Twitter. You can send us an email. And we'd love to follow you in this process, because we strongly believe that the more teachers who are taking part in project-based learning, the more inclusive we can make our classrooms, and perhaps the more we can reduce our own workloads and make it manageable and more inspiring to be in the classroom with our students. I'm going to pass over to Briley because I've been speaking non-stop for a long time.
If you just click on that workshop worksheet as well, Daryl, at the end, so the last one, yeah.
Let me just do that. This will just take me a moment. Da, da, da.
So we actually put together for you a whole worksheet that if you wanted to take it away, you could have a look at. So scroll all the way through, so you didn't just have to use it as a Padlet. We actually showed you 2 different types of question and what makes it more of a project and what doesn't. And also the different types of activities that you could possibly do within your school. Who would your authentic audience be? And then if you scroll down right to the end, you can see that I actually left in there as well a scheme of work where you could actually see where you would map out those milestones and different types of checkpoints, just so that it can help you with planning if you do want to go ahead with one of these. And as Daryl did say, please do get in touch with us if you would like some help. Even if it's just a 2 or 3 lesson project, that's just a great way of jumping in and having a go at it.
Yeah, so I mean, sorry it became so rushed towards the end. It is the nature of things and the nature of teaching. But hopefully some of this stuff is useful to you all. And yeah, just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for those of you who posted some ideas on the group. It does make the session, especially when we can't see you, a lot more, a lot easier. And yeah, please do get in touch. Project-based learning can address many of the things which are coming up strongly in this GA conference this year, to do with inclusion, to do with student voice, to do with involving the voices of the people that we are learning about and the people who are doing the learning. And it can make a real difference. And we're hopeful that we'll see more and more teachers taking part in these pedagogies to improve the classroom for everyone, teachers and students. So thank you very, very much.
That's it, we're done.
Everyone can run out the room now.
Yeah.
Thankfully, there's not a mic, so we can hear the stampede.